hope everybody out there is doing all right, hanging in there despite maybe the difficulty of existing and all that that entails. Hopefully my talk today will help with that level of difficulty that sometimes is there in just surviving and just keeping going and keeping motivation up, even when things get difficult or when your thoughts are spiraling and telling you all of this negative stuff. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about something that has been very helpful for me, both in eating disorder recovery and just in daily life, just in my relationships, in my work life and social life, and any other kind of anxieties that kind of come up in the day-to-day. But we're talking about DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, which is it's similar to cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's a way, it's usually used to treat depression, suicidality, negative coping behaviors, addiction, anxiety. Cognitive behavioral therapy is focused on altering negative thought patterns, but DBT, so dialectical behavioral therapy, is unique in that it adds another layer of non-judgment and self-compassion, which is really, really key, especially when you're coming from a place of such self-loathing and self-doubt and hopelessness. It sometimes is hard to even put the things into practice that you need in order to change your negative thought pattern. Dialectical means that two things that may seem contradictory on the surface can actually be true at the same time. For example, you can accept that a certain action or certain thought exists for a reason, but also recognize that those actions and thoughts need to be changed or shifted. Our brains and bodies are very intelligent, and we learn from all of our experiences, sometimes learning to cope in ways that are ultimately self-destructive. But just as we learn these negative coping strategies, we can unlearn them and develop a more ideal way to get through tough situations. The main pillar of DBT is non-judgment. If you're constantly beating yourself up for not knowing how to push through, or if you feel shame around your addictive behaviors, it's almost like you think you are undeserving of living a better and more peaceful life. So we need to get rid of that and take the first step of forgiveness, which is really key to moving on from the emotions that ultimately hold you back. I'm not a therapist. I want to just have a disclaimer, have a big caveat of this is like, I'm not a therapist. I'm not in any way certified in DBT or CBT or group therapy or anything like that. I've just gone through it enough and have gained a lot of insight into DBT through the many years of therapy. And at first it seemed to me like a lot of busy work, and there are a lot of ridiculous acronyms to remember. But all of that's kind of there for a reason. They're all necessary components to changing the way that you think, because all these little phrases and seemingly dumb, silly little exercises are the way that they're designed is to kind of trick your brain into changing your behaviors and changing those thought patterns. So if something is a little bit silly and maybe overly simplistic, then you're more likely to kind of retain it. So it's a lot to take in, and you'll see why it can be applied to almost any situation. It extends just beyond your relationship to yourself. It extends to your other relationships, to healing past traumas, and to preparing for the future. So not like spiraling and future tripping yourself, thinking of all the shoulds and what ifs. So it kind of does a good job of stopping all of those things in its track. I encourage everyone to do more research into the main pillars of DBT. It's a lot to take in. But if you start by incorporating a few points of it into your life, it can really make a big difference. So I wanted to talk about a few that are pretty easy to put into action and put into practice, like, as soon as possible. And these are the things that have really stuck with me and have been the most helpful to me in my experience with DBT and in my eating disorder recovery experience. So for those looking to try it out, here are a few good things. The first is what's called radical acceptance, which is kind of, as its name suggests, it means accepting where you are and how you're feeling, no matter how difficult it is. I find this one oddly liberating because shit sucks, and sometimes just saying that shit sucks can be a really validating practice. Radical acceptance also means accepting things that you need to do in order to push through the situation. After all, oftentimes the only way out is through. So it's just to kind of paraphrase, radical acceptance is accepting where you are and what you need to change, and accepting how difficult that is gonna be. I have to radically accept that I have a mental illness like many other people, and I have to radically accept that it's led me to develop these negative coping behaviors, and I have to radically accept that it's gonna be a trek to try and change those things. And I need to radically accept that I need to gain weight in order to be healthier, and that's gonna be difficult. So that's a huge piece of that for me, because it's gonna be a long way that I view weight gain as a positive thing. It's kind of so ingrained in me that it's gonna feel like a very negative thing for a long time, and there's still gonna be an immense fear of weight gain for a while. And I have to radically accept that. So that's just kind of an example. Opposite action is kind of a little branch off of this. So opposite action can be really liberating as well. It's another DBT skill. Even though it's really gosh darn terrifying. It essentially means doing the exact opposite of what your urges are telling you to do, if for no other reason than just to say fuck you to that urge and prove to yourself that you don't have to give in to those urges. Another example of opposite action, in my own experience with an eating disorder, opposite action can look like taking an extra chip just because my eating disorder tells me that I'm only supposed to have a certain amount of chips. It's like that's a very small example of opposite action, but things like that can be very, very powerful in rewiring your brain to see an extra chip as like a thing that's not scary anymore. So I use opposite action every day, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, it's really, really tough. But it is kind of a source of motivation as well, because you do get that rush of fear, but also of satisfaction, because you are like being all angsty and saying a big old fuck you and telling that disorder, or telling those negative thoughts that they don't have to dictate, they can't dictate your behavior all the time. So yeah, those are kind of the first ones, radical acceptance, and then connected to that is opposite action. Another pillar of DBT is emotional regulation or distress tolerance. So while going through something like radical acceptance or opposite action, distress will definitely come up for sure. The other side of this is learning how to tolerate that distress and ride out those intense emotions. Some tools to help regulate emotions according to DBT include distraction, improving the moment, self-soothing, and making a very simple pros and cons list. Some ways that I use distraction is by listening to music, podcasts during a hard moment, playing an easy game with friends or family that are around. Distraction is tricky because it shouldn't be leaned on too much. This should be a place to start, or it should be a practice that is in your tool belt for like those most difficult situations when you really just can't sit with the feelings anymore. Like, you need to get out of your head. You need to focus on something else while doing what you need to do. Distraction can be really, really good for that. Improving the moment and self-soothing are kind of related. You can improve the moment by just changing your environment, or by breaking what you need to do down into a step-by-step thing. For example, you have a meal that's causing a lot of anxiety. Like, break it into, okay, like, I'm gonna do this part of the meal and just focus on that, and then I need to do this part. It's like taking it piece by piece rather than being like, oh my gosh, I have to do this whole thing. And that can be really helpful. And even just focusing on like, okay, can I do 10% more? Can I do half of what I'm being asked to do? Set like smaller goals like that can help you improve the moment. Self-soothing is done mostly by engaging the senses with something that brings you comfort. For me, sometimes like things like lighting incense or candles, or finding my cat and petting my cat. I highly recommend keeping animals around as much as possible. I've seen people use ice packs that will kind of help calm down from panic attacks, and because they're able to kind of focus on the cold sensation, and that will regulate blood pressure and everything like that, and all the physiological symptoms of being under so much stress. So those are some examples. The next kind of tool to have is just creating a simple pros and cons list. Like, what are the pros of doing this thing that's difficult? What are the pros of not doing this thing that's difficult? Usually the pros of doing the hard shit are more significant than the pros of not doing it, which is most likely the reason for not doing it is just to avoid distress. And so if you already have the tools for distress tolerance, then it makes it easier to actually do the thing. A huge con of not doing the hard work is that you never get out of the cycle, and you never grow beyond the fear. Nothing changes if nothing changes, okay? So if you don't keep pushing and do the hard thing that will help you break out of this negative coping cycle, then you will only ever be on that hamster wheel that just keeps going. That's a huge con of not doing the hard thing. Whether it's a meal, whether it's quitting an addiction, whether it's confronting a complicated relationship, whether it's vocalizing how you feel, all of that stuff can feel very uncomfortable and leave you feeling really vulnerable. So just be prepared for that, but it's always, always, always worth it. It is worth doing those things, and I think that's kind of the point of the pros and cons list. It shows you that it is worth it to keep pushing. The thing to note here is that the more you do a scary thing, the less scary it gets. And that's, I can pretty much guarantee that as a promise. Like, that's just kind of how exposure therapy works. And coupled with DBT, it really prepares you to start to rewire those thought patterns and everything like that, and gives you the tools to actually handle the stress so that you don't just have a panic attack in every situation that makes you uncomfortable. So I think that's a really, really significant point there. And just kind of to sum up everything, I'm going to read this quote. The 6 main points of DBT are to develop skills relating to accepting circumstances and making changes, analyzing behaviors and learning healthier patterns of responding, changing unhelpful, maladaptive, or negative thoughts, developing collaboration skills, learning new skills, and receiving support. So I think that kind of sums up what the purpose of DBT is. And I don't know, I mean, like I said, I've found it really helpful over the years. It's something that I've encouraged my support system here to practice in their own life, and also as it relates to me. So yeah, I'll probably do some other videos on some other main pillars of DBT and some other tools and skills that are wrapped up in it. But hopefully this is a good starting point to begin to put those things into practice and start reframing those thoughts and start actually tackling the things that you're probably avoiding because they make you uncomfortable or they make you scared. But you'll be okay, I promise. I promise things get easier. And yeah, thanks for watching.